join us on Patreon, and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The complex and multifaceted relationship between Black slaves and Native American tribes in North America is a topic that has been overlooked in mainstream historical narratives. This relationship was shaped by the intersection of colonial expansion, economic interests, cultural exchanges, and survival strategies. Understanding this dynamic requires a deep dive into the historical context of slavery, indigenous displacement, and the colonial powers' manipulation of both groups for their economic and political gains. From the early days of European colonization, Native American tribes and African slaves found themselves entangled in a system designed to exploit their labor and undermine their autonomy. European settlers, driven by the pursuit of wealth and territorial expansion, implemented policies that disrupted indigenous ways of life and imported African slaves to fuel their colonial economies. However, the interactions between Black slaves and Native tribes were not solely defined by oppression. These interactions also fostered moments of alliance, cultural exchange, intermarriage, and mutual resistance against colonial forces. In the southeastern United States, particularly among the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, the relationship with African slaves was deeply complex. These tribes were labeled civilized by European settlers because they adopted certain aspects of European culture, including the practice of chattel slavery. Influenced by the prevailing socioeconomic norms of the time, some Native American elites within these tribes owned African slaves, integrating them into their agricultural economies. This adoption of slavery was often a strategic move to align more closely with European American settlers and to secure their own sovereignty and territorial claims. However, the nature of slavery within Native American societies varied significantly from that practiced by European colonists. In many cases, enslaved Africans and Native communities were afforded more rights and could integrate more fully into the tribe. Some could marry into the tribe, own property, and even gain freedom over time. This contrasted sharply with the brutal, hereditary chattel slavery imposed by European colonists, where slaves were considered property for life with no legal rights. The Seminole tribe in Florida presents a notable example of a more inclusive relationship. The Seminoles developed close alliances with runaway African slaves who sought refuge from the harsh plantations of the southern colonies. These escaped slaves, known as Black Seminoles, formed autonomous communities within Seminole territory, contributing to the tribe's resistance against U.S. military campaigns, particularly during the Seminole Wars. The alliance between the Seminoles and Black Seminoles was rooted in shared experiences of oppression and a mutual interest in resisting U.S. encroachment. This solidarity was not universal, however. In some instances, Native American slaveholders participated in the same oppressive systems as European colonists. The Cherokee Nation, for example, established plantation economies similar to those of the southern states and enforced strict slave codes. This duality highlights the complexity of indigenous participation in slavery, driven by economic pressures and the desire to navigate the colonial landscape. The American Civil War further complicated these relationships. The 5 civilized tribes were divided in their loyalties, with some aligning with the Confederacy and others with the Union. Those who sided with the Confederacy often did so to protect their practice of slavery and their territorial autonomy. In the aftermath of the war, the U.S. government required these tribes to emancipate their slaves and grant them full tribal citizenship through treaties signed in 1866. This integration of freedmen into native tribes sparked long-standing tensions over identity, land rights, and political representation, many of which persist today. Beyond the southeastern tribes, the interactions between African Americans and Native Americans varied across regions. In the Northeast and Midwest, African Americans sometimes found refuge among tribes such as the Lenape and the Shawnee. In the Southwest, interactions between Black individuals and Native groups like the Apache and Comanche were shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life and conflicts with expanding American settlements. In some cases, Black individuals were captured by Native tribes during raids, but could be adopted into the tribe or integrated into their social structures in ways distinct from European slavery. Cultural exchanges between Black slaves and Native tribes enriched both communities. Shared agricultural practices, Culinary traditions, spiritual beliefs, and artistic expressions emerge from these interactions. African and Native American oral traditions, music, and storytelling blended to create unique cultural expressions that have endured in regions like the southern United States and the Caribbean. Resistance to colonial oppression often brought African and Native American communities together. Throughout history, there were numerous instances of joint rebellions and cooperative efforts to escape bondage and resist displacement. Maroon communities, formed by escaped slaves, sometimes allied with native tribes to fortify their settlements and defend against colonial forces. These alliances were grounded in a shared understanding of the struggle for freedom and autonomy. Despite these moments of solidarity, tensions and conflicts were also present. Competition for resources, cultural misunderstandings, and differing responses to colonial pressures sometimes strained relationships. The forced assimilation policies imposed by the U.S. government further complicated these dynamics, as native tribes were pressured to adopt European American practices, including slavery, to survive in a rapidly changing political landscape. In the post-emancipation era, the descendants of African slaves and Native Americans navigated a challenging terrain of identity and belonging. The treaties of 1866, which granted citizenship to freedmen within native tribes, created a legacy of contested rights and recognition. In recent years, legal battles over tribal membership and land rights have brought these historical tensions back into the spotlight, prompting ongoing debates about heritage, identity, and justice. The relationship between black slaves and native tribes is a testament to the complexities of human interaction under the strain of colonialism and systemic oppression. It reveals a spectrum of experiences ranging from solidarity and shared resistance to complicity and conflict. Acknowledging this nuanced history enriches our understanding of America's past and challenges simplistic narratives of victimhood and villainy. By exploring this intricate history, we gain insight into the resilience and adaptability of marginalized communities. The alliances, cultural exchanges, and struggles for recognition that characterize the interactions between African Americans and Native tribes continue to influence contemporary discussions about race, identity, and social justice. This legacy calls for a more inclusive historical narrative that honors the diverse experiences of those who lived through and shaped these defining moments in American history.